visual storytelling such as film, animation, audio production, 3D sensory experiences. Is this the final platform that we're ever going to need? I'm not completely sold on it, but what I have up here is a panel of 3 people who have some great experience in storytelling and narrative. So what I'm going to do is sit on this awkwardly low chair, away from them, and get them each to introduce themselves, tell them a little bit about their backgrounds, because what I'd like to try and explore today, and it's going to be less about me asking questions and more about the 3 of you asking each other questions. How is virtual reality going to impact the art of storytelling? What type of new experiences can we expect to see? And if we are interested in storytelling, what should we do to potentially get started? But I'll pass the microphone around. If we could each just start by introducing ourselves, letting the crowd know who we are and your experience or lack of experience in VR, that would be fantastic. So I'll put you over to Esther Harding from Storycode.
Hello everyone. Hello. Lovely to be here tonight. Thank you for coming out on a Monday. And my apologies for not being here at the start of the evening. I absent-mindedly took a wrong turn and ended up in the wrong part of the tunnel. And here I am. Anyway, I am a filmmaker. I work in feature film now for a company called Seed Pictures. They produced The Little Death, the comedy by Josh Lawson last year. We've just made a film with Adrian Brody called Backtrack, which is a psychological thriller. We're making Tim Winton's Breath next year, and we have just finished production.
Sorry, testing the microphone so you can have to share it.
We've just finished production
on a science fiction film
called Other Life, which is a very cool little project which will kind of bear fruit in this conversation, I think. My background is in documentary, so I'm also interested in virtual reality for documentary, and I was also the all-media producer on Storm Surface 3D with Peter Cott. And so I have some understanding of the all-media delivery of narrative content, but VR itself I am a total newbie. So tonight is my first night.
Great, thank you.
So my name's Mel Flanagan. I've got a company called Knob Studio. So I'm a producer and I've got a background in music, theatre, film. Worked in feature films for many years. A lot of what I did was story development, production, but also industry development. So looking at where industry was going and how we as organisations could invest in new storytellers. I've been crossed over technology in the last 10 years, so I've been working on more online content, interactive. Esther and I actually met on a project that we were doing together with the National Maritime Museum. So we do experience design and looking at how we can take different modes of stories into real world online, sort of cross-media, transmedia is the term that's used for that, but I do a lot of cross-media storytelling. So my company also does, we develop and design software and web applications, mostly around social impacts, environmental issues, also social environmental issues, and we've started working with government on helping them build services. So my interest in VR is, as a storyteller and someone who still works in fiction but also works in documentary, factual, and also on impact, stories with impact, is how we can get different mediums and different platforms for story and engagement, particularly audience engagement. I've just returned from the UK. I was over there for a fantastic forum which is called Crowdfunding, and that's a cross-media forum. So there's lots of people from all over the world and financiers come to London once a year and just talk about the trends in cross-media. So they actually held a very specific virtual reality, what was an exhibition called Virtual Stories. So I'd like to just touch on talking about that tonight and just share some of those learnings if I can.
Hello, I'm Martin Taylor. I am now head of content for SydneyVR, there's the banner over there. By trade, I'm a documentary maker. I've been making films for almost 20 years. And for the last 2 years, aside from making documentaries, I've been tinkering away in every spare waking moment and in evenings and on weekends in kind of developing my documentary VR kind of capabilities. So, I've got myself a 360 rig and tried to figure out what the kind of production workflow was and do some initial experiments, and very quickly came to realise that this is what I wanted to do forever. And so I've now officially made the switch and working, VR full time. As far as film projects go, we've just had a 3-part series on the ABC, which I series directed called Making Families Happy. And a lot of the projects that I kind of have been commissioned for are some kind of related subject to mine. Because my background is in documentary directing with psychoanalysis and semiotics. And I think VR lends itself to that kind of angle really well, because once you've got this thing strapped to the front of your face, you're in another world, and it's quite a mindful experience. And so it's been a lot of fun learning the new rules of filmmaking in virtual reality. It's quite different from traditional, what I call flat screen filmmaking. I think there's a lot of room to make some really exciting content in this industry.
So I imagine there are a lot of skeptical filmmakers or flat screen filmmakers, as they will forever be known as. So if you know a filmmaker, call them a flat screen filmmaker, just to see how that goes down. Look, no doubt whenever there's a new technology and a new medium, there's a lot of skepticism around it, particularly if you've invested most of your adult life, trying to get to a point where you might be accomplished in that particular field of expertise. Where do you believe that VR can take cinema to next? Maybe we'll start off with you, Mel.
I don't know the answer to that question, and I think that VR at the moment, in terms of the cinematic experience, of the quality of images that's coming through VR is not great. And one of the reasons that people are engaged in cinema is the quality of vision. That's surround sound. It's sitting in a dark space. I mean, I love that VR experience. So one of the the two pieces I saw, which I really loved, were the Cirque du Soleil pieces. I don't know whether anyone's seen them, and I'm happy to send some links through to the group of the work that was there. And also, there's a really fantastic person called Sascha Umfeld, who is he's the head of the Oculus Story Lab, and he's the director of that. So they've been trying to, and he self-confessed is the quality's not quite there yet. There's a lot of challenges in terms of creating content and long-form content. So at the moment they've really stretched it to sort of 12 to 17 minutes is kind of the max. And also one of the things that they're doing is how, it's the development of stories to take into that space, which is really difficult. And again, it's the more technologists and developers and designers can work with storytellers to develop stories that are very specific to that platform, I think we'll start to see exciting things. I think it's really dangerous to take a flat screen experience and try and put that into virtual reality. We need to be coming at it content first, creating the stories which are coming from the virtual world and being inspired by that, rather than kind of putting things into, it's like the cinema experience on mobile. We're taking the big screen into mobile. And it's a very different way of approaching vision and story. I guess I started working in mobile content production back in 2008 before the iPhone. And you learn a lot when you're kind of trying to engage with this and engage with audiences around something that was far less sophisticated than that. So I guess content first. It's like really, I would like to see more technologists working with storytellers and with people who have got great ideas, and really fostering that ecosystem of makers.
Esther, could you jump in on that one? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's...
I don't know that I can turn the aircon off, but I'll try from here.
Thank you. It's like living in a fridge.
It is
this stage.
You're just particularly under it. Just you guys are under it.
I think virtual reality has an extraordinary part to play in transmedia content delivery. I mean, I think, as Mel was saying, the creative quality of cinema and also the social quality and all of those kind of ideas that we talk about. We talk about going to the cinema or talk about watching television or engaging with content on your phone or playing a game. I mean, all of those experiences have their own benefits and their own aesthetic principles and their own reasons for doing them. And I think it's false to say one technology will replace the other technology. As we all know, video did not kill the radio star. And I don't think that virtual reality will kill cinema, or I certainly don't feel like it's the ultimate expression of content. I think it's, personally, I find it terrifying. I have, we were having a conversation in the break about the psychological implications of being locked in a screen here and ceasing to be able to ceasing to be able to differentiate between reality and virtual. It's not a joke that we will end up somewhere like the Matrix, I don't know. But it feels like those ideas need to be explored in tangent with in parallel with the development of technology.
As a director, as a VR filmmaker, the responsibility on you to look after your audience is going to be really, really important. If anyone's played any of the kind of dread halls experiences on the Oculus Rift, it's full of cheap thrills of you're walking through a corridor and then there's a scary person sort of jumps at you. It is terrifying. It is genuinely terrifying. And I think that's kind of like the early days of cinema where you could get away with those types of cheap tricks. Martin, I guess as a documentary filmmaker,
He knows cheap tricks.
yeah, he knows cheap. As someone who turns cheap tricks, what do you feel there is, and being a director, I guess, what do you feel is the responsibility of the director and to tell the right types of stories, to guide the user through something that could be terrifying, amazing, and enlightening? What do you think the responsibilities are?
There's a lot of responsibility, I think. Just on a basic level, again, we were talking about this earlier, a lot of the experiences that are out there at the moment, you put the device on, you click go. I mean, the fact that you've got to actually, on some of the things, click a computer and then wrangle this thing on your face is not natural in itself. And then you end up going into these experiences that just suddenly start. And what that content is then the next level. It could be a terrifying, suddenly you're with sharks, or suddenly you're running down a scary hallway, or there's a girl moving in reverse with her hair over her face, or whatever that is. And in VR, it is absolutely terrifying. It just taps into the kind of deep-seated psyche. So there's a lot of responsibility in that way, but just I think even on a more basic way, the film, the kind of narrative techniques need to guide you from the real world into the virtual experience and back again. And that's not only a responsibility thing, it's you actually buy into the experience so much more. I mean, the thing that I'm really excited about with virtual world, narratives and stories, is the ability to connect with characters in a very direct way. So if you're in VR and a person is in front of you and they look at the camera, it feels like a person is standing in front of you. And that is amazing, what you can do from that point forward about telling their story and learning about them as a character, I think is really, really powerful.
Which is an interesting point. What happens to the fourth wall? It's a tool we can break occasionally for dramatic effect, but if we do it this time, it could really mess people up. I know there's a Strangers with Patrick experience, which is on one of the example Gear VR experiences. Pianist is literally just playing in his studio. It's in stereo, and it's amazing. It's the demo I mostly show people for the first time. And two things happen guaranteed every time in that clip. The first one is, oh, he looked at me. He looked at you, and he looks at the camera, and suddenly changes the very nature of the experience from it being, oh, I'm actually quite comfortable observing this world, to suddenly, oh no, I'm actually here. And a sense of responsibility and of being in that place suddenly takes over. The second thing that happens is they're walking around and go, oh, there's a dog. So the sense of place and occasion, or recognising these things as well, means that you almost need to vocalise them. So are we going to see people in cinemas saying things virtually out loud? How do we, in cinemas, certainly in American cinemas, there's a lot of group dynamic that happens, which doesn't really happen in Australia, where people are clapping and cheering for the protagonist and all that kind of stuff, and it doesn't happen here. What's it going to be like when we're all sitting here in a room like this with devices strapped to our heads? Is there going to be a cacophony of, oh, there's a dog, oh, there's a dog, oh, there's a dog? How do we see public performance of VR taking place?
I think, just to jump in there, because it might be a bit of a mistake to think that that's how it will be used as a VR cinema. I mean, I think the toy box experience that was described earlier is more realistic. So people they don't need to physically congregate in a room and then put these things on, because they could just watch a screen. What you will be able to do is sit in the comfort of your own home and see a room full of people watching the same thing, but they're scattered around the globe, and then you can share an experience with them. If you want to whoop and holler, you're whooping and hollering with people in all these different countries. That's amazing.
I think the greatest thing about it, from my perspective, and outside of like kind of replicate the cinema experience, is actually the potential for collaboration as a collaboration tool. I mean, that's quite extraordinary when, I mean, they're in the same building, but if you can make something together and as an educational tool, that's phenomenal. And I think that there's a number of different kind of uses for it. There's lots and lots of different content, whether it be educational or not. Or again, some of the stuff that we saw in the UK was a number of people from the UN came to talk about how they're using virtual reality to create content to take people into places where the UN are, which is really quite compelling. And there's a beautiful film called Waves of Grace, which is about the Ebola outbreak, and it takes you into a place where the teams are working to fight Ebola. And so from that perspective, it's really taking us into a situation which the news can't really give us that impact, whereas taking you into a virtual reality space where there's actual recordings of events that gives you that proximity and gives you that understanding of what people on the ground are going through, I think is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree for certainly for documentary, and I mean, Christopher's Clouds over Sidra is a similar idea where they kind of take you into a refugee camp, and humans are notoriously bad at empathy over distance. You get more than 2 degrees of separation, and we just refuse to really genuinely understand what it means to engage with another person. And I think virtual reality certainly has that capacity for major issues and impact storytelling. The flip side of then having everybody in a room at home with their headset on, pretending to be in a room with other people, and the implications for that socially are equally terrifying.
Your partner's not wearing the headset, and you're just like, woo, like a bit awkward.
Well, there's no longer a fight for the TV if you can both watch 2 different things at the same time.
Right.
And some might say that's a utopian vision, and some might say that it's a dystopian vision. What interests me is at this point, personally I've been working in interactive storytelling for quite some time, and did a lot of work around interactive television, thinking that people really wanted to change the narrative on screen, and came up with these devices so that you could change the storyline halfway through an episode, or you can influence the results at the end there. And there's a lot of wasted years when really people just want to sit back and be fed the story. So, and we're in a similar position again with VR, where we have the opportunity to give control back to people, or to allow them to engage and shape the story. How much do we feel that we as filmmakers want to give the viewer the chance to interact with it, and how much do people just want to be spoon-fed?
Can I answer that? Because I think there's 2 different kinds of audiences really, and that's the lean in and the lean back. And I'm a bit of a lean back person. I like to lean in occasionally, but I guess it depends on the content in terms of how I want to interact with it. And the gaming community's been interacting and leaning forward for a long time, and that's just, the quality of gaming is so phenomenal now, and just the different kinds of contents and different story worlds is quite extraordinary. And I think that this is on a similar trajectory, which is again, it's content driven. It's not just about guns and sex. Actually, actually that's kind of what's driven the industry at this point. Like again, engaging with
Gun, sex and money.
gun, sex and money, yeah. But taking engaging with different kind of stories and storytellers, and really kind of taking and innovating in that realm, I think is kind of where we need to go faster than what gaming did. And I also think that the quality of vision, the quality of sound, and all of that will happen faster, because that's just where the world's at. Things happen faster now.
But even within gaming, you see now that there are single-person experiences and multiplayer experiences, and someone who grew up playing lots of solo player experiences, they're the ones I love the most. I don't like playing multiplayer. I don't want to be fragged as a noob. I don't want to be pawned. I don't want to be socially engaged with. So similarly, that split will happen within filmmaking. So I think filmmakers often want to engage their audience and want to get a real emotional response out of them. Sometimes audiences do or do not want to engage with that. What sort of stories do you want to tell in VR? Let's start with you, Esther.
I suppose it's really, I sort of turn the question back and say, what kind of stories do VR users want to hear?
What defines a VR user? Are we all VR users or?
Well, this is what's so interesting. I mean, one of the things I learned about when producing Storm Surfers was we ended up producing a different kind of iteration of the Storm Surfers story world, based not only on the device but also the user of that device. So we targeted this was 2012 whenever we released it. We targeted for iPad users, which was still then almost exclusively men between the ages of 35 and 45. We said, we're going to create a magazine app that's dedicated to surfing content that can be consumed quickly between meetings. It's like we really thought about who that audience was and designed for them. For a VR audience, as we've sort of seen tonight, there are so many applications across industry, across design, across architecture, and all of these things. But it's in terms of creating movie content, I think it's very much that sense you were talking about of something where you can walk people in. We've just produced the film Other Life, which is a sort of a nanotechnology story where the tech enables you to create memories. So similar to VR, it takes you on a journey. And what feels like hours is only a few seconds and all that sort of thing. Which is going to be really interesting, but of course the virtual reality opportunity is to then create that experience, and have that sit side by side with the film, and to not try and recreate the film for VR, but to create the experience that we're talking about, and to then match that in the release strategy. So it becomes,
So when you're able to create content for a market that exists, you can be as definitive as that. Males 35 to 45 in between meetings. With VR, there's no consumer marketplace yet, so what type of stories do we tell now, considering that maybe they're technology early adopters, they're mostly here in this room. What type of story do these guys want to hear as a film? Who wants to take that one, Martin or Mel?
What I can say is the reason I'm into VR is born out of a frustration with reaching a limit of the kind of story I want to personally tell with traditional media, and that is having a character take you into the experience of what it feels like in their mind, and that can be serious subjects like dementia. It could be do blind people dream? Those kind of experiences are really, really difficult to get across using editing. Even with special effects, there's a limit to the fact that you've got a piece of glass in front of you. With VR, we were talking about the fourth wall. I think the magic of VR is being able to step through that and into their experience, literally inside it. And that not only, I've been doing little tests myself, and the ability to give goosebumps based on kind of really being surrounded by what somebody's describing is going on for them is really, really compelling, and I think that is something unique to virtual reality filmmaking. Alongside that, and as an extension of that, the ability to tell stories about very, very complex subjects and build a VR world around you where you just get it, because it just sinks directly in, rather than having to go A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, in a kind of linear, traditional film way. That's what's exciting me.
So I'd like to take VR into the museum world and make live and living museums. So I think it's just a perfect medium for that, to be able to go into. I want to go into ancient Egypt, and I want to be in a place where there's all the artifacts around you, or I want to be in a Neolithic campfire, with what they're eating, but again, and there's some great museums that are really going into, and there's some fantastic examples of incredible kind of interactive content that's in museums. So I think virtual reality is definitely a place, or virtual stories. It's a really great platform for that. And me personally, I want to be making, I can see the applications of VR with some of the interactive documentary stories that we're doing around the making of things, where things come from, the sort of mechanics and the process engaged in the connecting to the things that are around us. So that's kind of, for me personally, that's why I'm really interested in this realm. But I think one of the biggest challenges for the industry is going to be the technology will move very, very fast, and there'll be a lot of people, lots of geeks trying new technology. One of the challenges is going to be, which is a constant challenge for storytellers, and it's not just filmmakers, it's all storytellers across all platforms, is getting funding to make quality content. And content just takes time to develop, and it just takes a wee while to work things out. I think now there's a modern movement, which I think is awesome, and which we're part of in terms of software development, which is really around audience engagement and participatory design. And I can see in VR that it would be great to kind of take that kind of story development into this realm, because it does need to move fast. But the big question is, where's the money for the content going to come? So is it going to be Samsung who are going to go, great, we'll start a content development fund here, or Oculus are doing that, they're sharing their stories and their processes and their difficulties and their successes. But whether it's branded content or whether it's actually, and it's hard to do, not everything can be paid for by a brand. We really do need to find other ways to fund good quality content.
I think what I like about the industry and where it's at right now, and it comes back to what you were saying earlier, Mel, is that to some extent, as the maturity of cinema and television, we expect a high level of quality. We expect, cinematically, TV to look like film did, 5-10 years ago. And equally, with video games, we expect everything to be perfectly rendered in 3D. But for me, VR is very much a Wild West again. We're resetting the clock. It's a chance for everyone to start from basic building blocks and say, what sort of stories can I tell with the tools that I've got? And we will get back to that cinema level quality, but this is a chance to explore again. I think this is like the early days of the cinema. This is like the early days of web, where flash movies took over everything. We think of simple stick figure drawings that told amazing stories. They weren't beautifully rendered. They were still telling beautiful stories with stick figures. And one of my favourite VR experiences is one called Butts. And it is literally a red and a blue character hopping up around. They fart sparkles and they fly around each other and they fall in love. It takes all of a minute and a half. It delights my children like nothing else. It delights anyone ever show it to for the first time. And I think that says you can still tell great stories with the tools we've got today. So given the tools we've got today, what could we create today?
Well, when I was at the documentary conference last year at ITFA, there was an extraordinary experience, I suppose similar in concept to the toy box, where they had two headsets and you found yourself in the other person's body. So, and it was an experiment they did in the States, and they had like a wheelchair, somebody bound to a wheelchair would swap physical experiences with a basketball player, and in all of these sorts of things, and it became this extraordinary project in social unity and sort of empathy, sort of generating this extraordinary relationships between these two people who were sharing each other's bodies. So I suppose, I mean, with the tools we have available, it's these stories of the mind, it's these stories of, you know, literally stepping into somebody else's perspective, which has massive application for social impact storytelling, and, you know, and in narrative storytelling, then it, as I say, it's kind of that experiential, you know, addition to.
Are there film bodies now that are able to fund or commission some of these projects for the traditional, you know, film television offices and stuff like that? No?
There isn't. So that's one of the reasons why we really need to be advocates for this kind of, and let them know that there's an audience out there, and we need to be vocal about it. That's the only way that they're going to start funding. Most of the multimedia funding or transmedia funding, whatever you want to call it, interactive funding, gaming funding, it's all gone. And there's no one really in government that's really pushing that. So we need to be very vocal about it.
There were some amazing CD-ROM projects created out of those funds, though. Amazing CD-ROMs.
Film funds tend to come about based on mass consumption or high impact or both. We're not going to get mass consumption for a while, so they've just got to be high impact. So, you know, stories like Clouds Over Sidra, filmmakers like Chris Milk, they're doing really well because they're picking their battles and they're finding the funds for those films. They're not cheap films. You know, they look simple and they're short, as most films are, but it's taken a lot of work and a lot of funding to kind of bring them about and do them well. So yeah, that's the way to go at the moment.
A lot of local funding and funding for stories is really based on, and the government funds, based on a distributor or a broadcaster. They're very broadcaster or distribution focused, and that's what's really hard about this kind of work, whether it be mobile or online, or moving into this, is there's platforms out there, but there's no particular broadcaster, there's no particular distributor, you can self-distribute. So again, that business model in terms of how we fund content and how we get bureaucrats and politicians' heads around the fact that things have really moved on. You know, we're all broadcasters now. You know, there's multiple platforms, and that some of them can be actually really, that there's money to it. You know, you can earn money on a number of different platforms. So just open that up so it's not so locked down into old world traditional thinking about reaching audiences.
And if you were to, who here in the audiences work on storytelling or as a filmmaker or looking at filmmaking inside VR as something they want to do? Okay, great. So what would be a last parting word, I guess, to these guys here about what they might be able to do to seize the initiative, seize the day and start creating something and kickstart the new industry?
Save up for a stack of 6 GoPros and strap them into a little ball and get out there and start filming stuff. I mean, 360 is not the only way of creating content either. There's a kind of this different approach, which is almost like setting up virtual layers of filmmaking, you know, kind of information. So you could film someone with a regular camera against green screen and then kind of put them in a little virtual set against you know, a kind of digital background. There are a lot, you know, this is what we're learning. The actual production techniques are changing very quickly. The company Lytro have just released a new kind of camera altogether based on light fields. So it's like a ring, it's like several rings of, they're in effect, there's like millions of tiny little cameras in these rings, and because it's very wide, it can see around objects because of parallax. And so it's a live action camera, but in VR you can lean into people and you can actually look around them and subjects. And what they're aiming for is to be able to probably set up 2 or 3 of these systems in a space and build the volume of space and actually capture environments. And with systems like the Vive, you'll be able to walk around the story and you know, discover it for yourself. It's pretty amazing.
And the other thing is the writing of stories for VR. We were both speaking with Mike Jones, who writes for Portal Entertainment, and he started doing some VR work. And he was saying that the writing of scripts for VR is more akin to playwriting than screenwriting, because although you have a screen, and because you can't really walk in VR yet, you can't follow a character through a door and down a corridor, you have to return the action and that character to your immediate physical space. So it becomes much more about compelling characters to move away and come back and to engage with each other in your field of vision and disperse. So it's a really interesting, if you're writing content in VR, to really think about how the technology limits and simultaneously kind of liberates you in this form of storytelling.
I would say find some people to play with, because I think we're in that realm of play and experimenting, and and that theatre experience is that it's getting together and workshopping stuff. It's not just having actors in a room, it's not just having writers, it's not just about having a director with a vision, it's actually having technologists in the room as well, and designers and interaction designers or experience designers, and find some teams to start working with and then start workshopping ideas, and then you'll work out pretty quickly what's going to work and what's not, and software development, iterate, evolve it. But again, find a way where you can make stuff fast, play with it, and then leave the kind of, I guess, the quality kind of capturing of those stories to when you've actually nutted out the story itself and what that experience is going to be.
I've just got one last one. So one of the challenges with traditional filmmaking that I've found, especially with high concept stuff like TV commercials and drama, you have this idea in your head. You're imagining a world, you're imagining a character and what they're doing, and you are this kind of center of their world, because in your head you're imagining that, and then through what you've learned over several years in film school and a career is how to then rubbish all of that and turn it back into storyboard frames. You've got to kind of deconstruct what was going on in your head and kind of map it out in a very different way, so that when somebody watches that screen, then gets rebuilt inside their head in a similar way. With VR, you can just keep it in that form. You don't need to translate it to another language before bringing it back again. So you imagine that story, and that's how you're going to build it, because you will essentially be the center of the VR world when you make that. So imagine how the story flows around you. That's the way you need to think making VR stories.
So just wish it into being.
Yeah.
Great. Does anyone else have a question? Panel?
Just on funding, I'm just curious, do Kickstarter have funding to work for something like a movie or you guys do, or is there just not the money in it?
I can control it. All the experience that's been there. We'll probably have different experiences.
One of the challenges with Kickstarter now is that it's actually pretty sophisticated. You've got to almost have finished the project to stand out. So whereas before you could do a very, very early version of something and everyone would latch onto it, and then actually releasing the campaign is just the beginning. You almost need a marketing team to push it and push it and push it, and to get the money. So yes, it can be done, but it's a hell of a project to raise money for that kind of thing. Tech is easier, because you're going to ship a physical thing, whereas content's a bit harder.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the story. Certainly for social impact storytelling, where you were building a coalition of the willing around that story. Produced a few films through Good Pitch. And that works very well, the crowdfunding mechanism for those kinds of stories, because they are really appealing to your heart and your hip pocket. But I think it's, my understanding of crowdfunding is it's better at building audiences than it is at raising cash. So you do it less to, raise the $1 million. you do it to get the couple of thousand people who might give you $5 to then build that database of people who will stay with the project through its gestation and birth and release into the wild. And it's about the power of the word of mouth from those core people who start with you to build that audience over time. And I imagine for something like VR, where it is such a small audience to start with, and that you're not buying into tech, you're building into story, that you need to kind of simultaneously grow the appetite for the tech as well as for the story. So it's kind of a complicated challenge that we're setting ourselves, but I think it's, finding that magic bullet, as always.
You've got to find people that are as passionate about something as you are. So, I've invested in a Kickstarter, a couple of, content pieces because they were very much along my interests, but that was 9 months ago. I'm starting to wonder, where the project is and when it's coming. So, it's, by the time it comes out, there'll probably be 10 other things just like it. So, I think Kickstarter these days is actually very hard, like Martin was saying, unless you've got a physical product that you can bring to market and a massive budget to make it happen. It's harder to create something from scratch. Other people that are passionate about the same topic, and then it's really just your man hours to sort of make it happen, and that will help drive other investment and promotion and marketing around that as well.
I think the thing for crowdfunding is you kind of need an audience before you get into the crowdfunding. So it is about building an audience of people who don't know you, but before you go into crowdfunding, there's a massive amount of job, like work, and anyone who's doing any crowdfunding, the work prior to kind of getting on the platform is always underestimated. And it's really important to look at who your networks are and look at as many different people as you can connect to, because once you're up there, you've got a finite period of time to get the money in. And once you're there, you go or you're not. So we did crowdfunding for a documentary that I was an executive producer on a couple of years ago. That was around a very, very famous person. And was the producer of Rocky Horror Picture Show and Monty Python Holy Grail, and we did a crowdfunding campaign, but the filmmakers were really, this was before I got on board, the filmmakers were really busy. And so they kind of went, yeah, we're out there, it's great, we're on, Indiegogo, it'll be cool. And they raised a fair amount of money, but had there been a bigger team behind it, we would have been way more successful, because we didn't really infiltrate all of those fan clubs that were really around all of those films, and we could have made a monster. But it was, you have one opportunity to do it, and it really is about doing that research and having those kind of networks to hit into. But I think it's a really great way to, if you can, particularly Indiegogo, because if you don't raise what you've asked for, you still get to keep the money. It's a great way to be able to prototype something. I think to expect that crowdfunding is going to give you the total budget you need to produce the entire thing, it's just not going to happen on those kind of platforms. There'll be other ways to funding projects is really about kind of putting all the pieces of pie together and all the different funding pies.
Well, if no one else has got another question, I'd like to... One question, please. Yeah.
I guess it's more for you, Martin. This is a technical question about 360 video. For me, and I think a lot of filmmakers, they think that the magic in movies is the editing. So you can shoot all the footage, and then once you edit it, that's where the magic of the story comes out. But with 360 video, where do you see, is editing obsolete? Does it throw people off? Like in your experience, where do you see editing fit into that?
Editing needs to happen behind you. That's where it needs to happen. So you can edit, but you just need to distract the viewer over there for a minute, and when they look back, it's changed. And there's a lot of the analogies that I've found making 360 content is it's something between a stage show. So you imagine it's almost like you're taking the viewer and standing them in the middle of a stage, and all of the action is going on around them, and magic tricks. So there's a lot of misdirection that happens or should happen, doesn't happen enough, to basically, there are different tricks, right? So you can kind of fly up on more beat past or have a dog run past you or something, you will instinctively look like that. And then you can change what's behind them, and by the time they go back, it's different. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff, and it's the same as Esther was saying, the distance between you and the background, so you can bring focus towards you, and that kind of engages you quickly, and by the time that's resolved, you then get them to look this way, and so you can definitely guide a story. It just needs to be done in kind of invisible ways.
The old tricks don't apply anymore. Basically, you can't edit your way out of a bad capture.
Editing in VR or in 360 feels like teleporting, and it's really jarring. So the simple way is just to fade to black and fade up, but there's much more you can do than that.
Last question, James. We'll try and keep this one short. Yeah.
Keeping it on that. So right now, the tool sets to build live content in particular are very, very in their infancy. And obviously, it's like film's gone over time. Tools have gotten better. We've got crazy special effects, but you can't quite do that in VR just yet. Do you think having like something like a live edit tool that takes, you've got this intrinsic gaze input into your content, can you then utilize that as something to do live editing? Do you think?
You mean like a live switching?
Well, I mean, there's what you were proposing before, like somebody might follow it, but then there's always going to be a few people that didn't catch it or whatever, and are still looking where that edit switch happened. Do you think that having tool sets that allowed you to track, where the user are and provide, okay, wait until they've actually looked over this way before this thing happens?
Oh yeah. So I mean that's really a kind of tech question. It's really about, because at the moment these things that are attached to your face, your head, you actually don't work like that. Your head moves separately to your eyes. Your eyes lock onto things, and they're still trying to resolve that. So that's one of the reasons why it doesn't quite gel yet as an experience. You do kind of feel a little bit funny because the way that you actually take in the world with the equipment that you have is not replicated fully. So there are companies that are making headsets there's a company called Fovo, and they're doing like eye tracking and those kind of things, and they're using those as mechanics so they can detect if you are actually looking at something in particular. And so they're building game mechanics and kind of tool mechanics and things like that. So yeah, it will get there, but it's driven by the mask itself.
Thank you very much for your great questions, and if you'd like to thank Esther Harding, Mel Flanagan and Martin Taylor, thanks very much.